Imagine it's 1977. You come home from a hard day of school and you can't wait to play the latest adventure game that came out. So you put the disc inside this bad boy and this shows up. Oh yeah, big video gaming. So how did we come from this to this? Let's find out. In the early days of video gaming, there was no emphasis on storytelling, and honestly, that's not surprising seeing that games look like this. The developers were happy enough that they managed to run the video game on a computer that is 100 times slower than your smartphone, and they just didn't bother with creating a narrative for the game. And can you honestly blame them? Back then, games were looked upon as just ways to distract children. That's why most of the early games don't give you a reason for existing in the world, or if they do, it wasn't more than a few sentences. Take Mario for example. The game tells you to rescue the princess, so you do, without asking any questions, because people back then didn't care about the narrative. Of course, there are some exceptions as well. Zork was one of the first games that not only had a story, but also let the player choose what happened next. The only downside of Zork was that it looked like this. So one of the reasons early games didn't have narratives was the hardware. In the 70s and 80s, arcades were very popular, and if you know what an arcade is, you know that you can't spend hours and hours a day on it to play video games. And so the developers just didn't bother to include extensive stories, because not many people would be able to finish them. Instead, they went on with simple narratives like I mentioned earlier, with Mario and Donkey Kong. But all this changed with the apparition of more affordable consoles. When almost everybody can play games at home and start off the next day in the same point that they quit last day, is the perfect time to develop video games as a storytelling medium. And companies did exactly that. So, like this, appeared games like Ultima and Might and Magic, games that were revolutionary for the time, being one of the earliest 2D RPGs. Then, in the early 90s, the biggest revolution for the gaming world happened. 3D graphics. This is for video games like the second coming of Christ. This honestly, except for the creation of video games, might be the single most important moment for gaming. And you might think, why? Well, the answer is simple. Because with 3D graphics, you can create more compelling worlds, and with more compelling worlds comes better stories and narratives. And games suddenly became a great medium for storytelling. Games like The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time and Tomb Raider launched, games that are absolutely classics. The 90s were riddled with absolute classics like Half-Life, GoldenEye, Doom, Final Fantasy VII and more, but things got even better from there on. The 2000s took what the 90s offered and made it 100 times better. Up until this point, games were really impressive, but the 2000s is where they foreshadowed their full potential. 2003 is when a masterpiece launched. Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic. It's probably, to date, the best Star Wars game ever released, and the story of this game is unbelievable. Everything from the characters to the plot twist is masterfully written. And 4 years later, another masterpiece launched, BioShock. This game is probably the best game of the 2000s, and not because of its graphics, but because of its story and world. But before talking about BioShock, let's talk about the importance of the world for the story. Every great fictional story takes place in a great world. Take Lord of the Rings for example. The story of the Lord of the Rings is amazing, but the things that make it even better is the world. The same applies for games, and BioShock is no stranger to that. The story of BioShock is masterfully crafted, but Rapture makes it 10 times better. The feeling that a world gives out can either make or break a game, and this is why the 2000s are so important, because they paved the way for the amazing worlds we see today. But don't think that only open world games have great stories, and the 2010s showed us exactly that, with games like Life is Strange, Heavy Rain, Beyond Two Souls, and my favorite, Telltale's The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead might be one of the best series I've ever played, and I'm gonna be honest with you, when Lee died at the end of season 1, I cried like a little girl, and I'm not even joking. But then, in 2013, PlayStation's best ever game launched, The Last of Us. The way this game merges gameplay with the story and cutscenes might be the best ever. The story of Joel and Ellie is perfect, from the character development to the world build-up. Everything comes together masterfully, to create probably the best narrative ever written for a game, except one that we'll talk about a bit later. In 2015, my favorite game of all time and the ultimate RPG launched, The Witcher 3. The reason The Witcher 3 excels from a writing point of view is because for most players, myself included, this was the first game of the series that we played, so the writers faced the hard task of making us care about and believe the story. And oh boy, did they succeed. The main story, the side quests, the world, the characters, everything was written and developed so unbelievably good that even today the game doesn't seem 8 years old. But the best story written for a video game, at least in my opinion, is the story of Red Dead Redemption 2. The story is unbelievable. Arthur Morgan's evolution and portrayal are so good, like it's not even funny. If you didn't cry at the end of the game, I don't even know what is wrong with you. Arthur's death might be the saddest moment in gaming, because he is probably the best protagonist in gaming history. He is the meaning of learning from the past, because that's exactly what Rockstar did. He is the peak of video game writing, or at least in my opinion. And I'm gonna end the video with that thought. The next time you play a game, maybe take a moment and think how far we've come. If you like this video, it would mean the world to me if you subscribed and left a like. I'll see you again soon. Thank you for watching.